Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 80th Fireside Chat. Thank you all for being here today. We have a new member with us today. That's Victor. Please go ahead first, Victor, with your questions.
Thanks a lot. So, first of all, Tom, thanks a lot for your work. I found it very, very profound and inspiring. So I have a question about the LCS's motivation for survival and growth. So in the MBT books, there is a chapter called What's the Point, which suggests that the LCS as a consciousness ecosystem continually evolves toward survival and lower entropy. However, I find myself wondering, what's the point of the point? In the sense, why do we need a consciousness ecosystem in the first place? And why does it need to survive even at the cost of a never-ending effort? So if we assume that consciousness is fundamental and it cannot self-destruct, then we could maybe just set all the bits, all the reality cells to zero, maybe something similar to the AUO in your books, which would be done maybe not by evolution, but by conscious intent. So if we do that, the result would be like a timeless, perfect order, which has obviously no fear, no ego, no belief, but admittedly also no love. So my question is, what would be the entropy of such a system? And why is the LCS not evolving in that direction?
All right, well, that's a bunch of questions all at once, Victor. Let me kind of parse those. Yes, the way my system works is that I have consciousness as a very fundamental thing, like a reality cell, and then it evolves. So I start small at the smallest possible unit of consciousness and then show how under the pressures of evolution, it would turn into what we call the larger conscious system, or Aum. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we just start with consciousness full up as it is a whole system. If we don't evolve, then basically we are kind of in the same place as the other non-dualists, and that is that the source just is. It's already perfect, well developed. It's not necessarily evolving or growing or becoming. It's perfect, it's infinite, it comes from nowhere, and we just start from there. We are part of that source. And that's kind of the traditional non-dualist space. And they call that source God for the most part. In all the various non-dualist, there's lots of colors or variations in non-dualism, and MBT is one of those. But if you do that and you just start that way, then you start with something that is done, something that's already finished. It's already evolved. It's already a consciousness system. It didn't have to evolve from anything. It is supernatural rather than natural. And you don't have a way of describing or understanding, many of the things that are significant. So we say this is a virtual reality. Why is this a virtual reality? I mean, why would a virtual reality such as this grow up for individuated units of consciousness to play in? Well, in MBT, there's a reason for it. It's about evolution. It's about lowering entropy. It's about growing up. And there's a reason for that VR. You need consequences. You need important consequences in order to grow up, in order to make meaningful choices, very significant choices. So you need all of that. There's all of the things, I guess, that go with beginnings, with growing up. The idea that that why is growing up becoming love? Why is that the positive direction of evolution? Why should evolution want to grow toward becoming love, toward cooperation and caring? Why that? Why not something else? Why not toward, just having fun or some other sort of thing? Why is it toward becoming love? Well, that's because it's moving toward states of lower entropy. And in a social system, you minimize entropy through cooperation and caring for each other in a social system. And that's pretty obvious. So if you start with everything already done, then you don't have any of those answers, like why virtuality? Why evolving toward love? Beginnings. How come it is? How did the larger conscious system figure out that love is the answer? How did it work that out? Was it just born that way, and it just was that way? Well, in my model, it becomes that way because in order to produce more potentiality in more states that it could evolve into, it created all these individuated units of consciousness, and now had to interact with them, and they all have free will, and the system had to learn that love is the answer, and that cooperation is the only way that you can succeed or lower entropy in a social system. And at first, the system probably tried to bully, probably tried to cajole, probably tried to order. All right, all you IUOCs, we're going to do this and that, and here's the way we want to be. And it didn't work because they all had free will, and they said, no way, we're doing it our way. So the only way that the system can grow is if it grows together. If it grows as a thing, as a thing. So now that kind of shows that the system learned about love from us, and we have to learn about it from each other through our interactions here. So you see, just a whole lot of things get explained. Even a friend of mine at Gonzaga University, who's the chairman of religious studies, I think there, he immediately liked the idea that, this gives an explanation between why the Old Testament is a jealous, angry God who turns people into pillars of salt and does all sorts of other things. If you don't obey, it's all about obedience and that sort of thing. And the New Testament is a God, it's all about love and caring and turning the other cheek and treating your neighbor as yourself and that sort of thing. So there's a very big distinction there between those. Well, one is kind of very ancient history and the other is a little more modern. And maybe that signifies or explains, or is an example of an LCS growing up, learning about love. So just lots of things. And I could probably, if I thought about it a while, list, 6 or 7, 8, 10 things that we learned by going through this progress from very beginning to the whole. And it's really what distinguishes us from the other schools of non-dualism, is that non-dualism has nothing to say about beginnings. It just is, and it's perfect, and it's done. And it has nothing to say about endings. Most non-dualism has the ending as you finally grow up and return to the Godhead and become one with the system again, which then makes a rational person ask, well, why, if you were already there to begin with, did you break off so that you could suffer? And then after you've suffered enough, you go back to where you started, which is part of the Godhead. That doesn't seem like a really good plan. What's the point? It's like, well, I know, let's break off pieces and let them suffer for a while, and then we'll bring them back home. Doesn't sound like a really rational plan for going forward. And at the far end, not the beginning, but at the ending, they have this idea of returning, but the whole point of the system was that it had to break itself into pieces in order to create a larger set of possibilities. What can happen when, what can 1,000 people working together do that one person can't do by themselves? Well, a whole lot of things. You get, that's what synergy is all about, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So in any case, then they would have that system going backwards. The parts returning back to the whole is, well, the whole split those parts apart for some reason. Of course, the regular non-dualism doesn't know what that reason is, or can't come up with a really good reason why I would bother doing that. So this gives, rationality to all those things, rationality to the end. In MBT, there is no ending. You always, as you mentioned, you always just, entropy increases if you don't put energy in to decrease it. So it's kind of an ongoing system. And it's evolving, so it's open-ended. It's not done. It's still becoming. What we can become together hasn't been sorted out yet. We're still maybe even in the early stages of that. So that's the main differences. So by doing it the way MBT does it, you answer a whole lot of questions and make sense out of a whole lot of things that if you start in the middle with it done, and why wouldn't it just stay done? And why would it create any IUOCs that weren't perfect, or at least as perfect as it was? Well, maybe when it created those IUOCs at the beginning, it wasn't all that perfect. It still had a lot to learn itself, you see. So that's, I hope I've answered your question, but that's kind of the big answer to your question is why does MBT do it that way and why not the other way? Well, it's necessary in my mind to see this as not a supernatural system, but a natural system called consciousness. And it's evolving. And it started small, just like everything else, and grew up, still growing, open-ended. So there is no, evolution doesn't have a final state. As long as there are new and more possibilities to grow into, then evolution just keeps chugging along. So anyway, that's hopefully that answered your question. It is an interesting question, and I actually just thought about all of this in a little more depth just a few months ago, which was when I was talking to Rupert Sparrow, who is a non-dualist of some renown, and I was interviewed by him, and we had a chat, and he started in the middle about non-dualism, and I was going, yes, I agree, and we basically had identical ideas about the nature of things until we got to beginnings and endings, and there we differed, greatly. So that kind of put it all in perspective to me, exactly what were the differences and so on. And all of the differences come from making it a natural system that is not perfect and trying to survive like any other system. Now, maybe that's being a little melodramatic, trying to survive, but basically if you de-evolve enough, then the information system disappears. There's no longer any information in it. Not that that's a likelihood or even a very high possibility, but still it's evolution. So if that doesn't answer your question and I left something out, I kind of took all of your questions and wadded them all up into that one bag. I hope I got most of them, but there's any still hanging. Go ahead and
yeah, I think so. The way I understand your answer is that the entropy of such, like, if we forcefully set all the bits to 0, that would be maybe not a smart choice. And that system, even from that state, evolution itself would evolve to. So maybe that's like not the lowest entropy state, if I understand correctly, and the system would evolve further.
Oh yeah,
to start making IOCs and that sort of thing. Yeah. Is that correct?
Well, setting all the states to 1 or all the states to 0 is not low entropy. That's not the ultimate in order. Taking those states and taking those 1s and 0s and making something meaningful of them, making something significant of them, making them symbols for other things. That is a much lower entropy than just setting them all to 1 or setting them all to 0. That there's levels of entropy that the system can achieve, but you achieve low entropy by creating order. Well, all 1s or all 0s, that's a certain amount of order, but that's not nearly as much order as taking those 1s and 0s and, say, generating mathematics. Now, that's another whole bunch of order. Let the 1s and 0s stand for quantity. So 1, 1, 1 might be the quantity of 3, or you might go to binary to make your numbers. But there's ways by letting the numbers have meaning and significance to symbolize things that the order that you can create is much more significant and much lower entropy than just having all 1s or all 0s. So, it's it's not. There is. I get this question sometimes: is that, well, look, evil sometimes is well organized. Look at the death camps, right? They were very well organized. They were purely evil, but very well organized, very efficient. And they say, well, isn't that low entropy? Well, yes, it is low entropy, but in a very trivial sense. The destruction, the disruption, the problems created were immensely high entropy, and to subtract that little low entropy because they were well ordered and efficient, is like taking, a trillion and subtracting 1 from it and say, well, at least we had that 1 that was low entropy. Yes, but the overall result was very high entropy. So orders just is not the only thing. Order can be something more, has more dimensions to it than just everything, being in line or everything being efficient. Order has to do with how much work can it do? What can it achieve? That's another way of looking at entropy. There's 2 ways in physics that we look at entropy. 1, it's a measure of disorder. And 2, it's a measure of the work that can be done by a system. What potential does that system have to do things? And if you do that, then if you look at it that second way, the potential to do work, then you can see that just having a bunch of 1s or 0s doesn't have a whole lot of potential to do anything. So it's still pretty high entropy. So that's kind of another way of looking at entropy. And the 2 are associated. Actually, those 2 are very associated. For example, you take a glass of gasoline. Now, if you have a glass of gasoline, you could atomize it, like put it in a sprayer, throw a match in, and you'd have a really big explosion. You'd have a lot of energy, and that explosion would be able to change all sorts of things, blow things apart, make big holes, burn things up. It would have all kinds of energy that it had. But you can just let that gasoline sit there in that glass for a while, and its molecules would all evaporate. And now you have all that gasoline, same molecules, but they're spread all over the atmosphere. What can it do? What changes can it make? What's its ability to do something and make changes? Well, none. Doesn't have any ability. So you see, the 2 do travel together, the disorder and the ability to do work. So That's entropy from like the second definition of entropy. It's ability to do work. Low entropy things are ordered in such that they can accomplish things, do things, affect things, make changes. And high entropy things can't do anything. They're impotent. They just are, but can't actually function to do anything. Well, a whole bunch of ones or a whole bunch of zeros that don't really accomplish anything either, other than they all look the same.
I see. So you said in the middle that if we don't put in work, then the entropy will automatically increase.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say something about whether that is a fundamental property of consciousness? My understanding was that it's more like a thermodynamics thing, which is part of PMR physics. But the way you said it, it seems like it's more fundamental.
Yes, it is fundamental to PMR physics. Obviously, everything has a vapor pressure. Everything eventually will just kind of disappear into molecules spread around evenly everywhere. But in consciousness, if you don't make any effort to evolve or grow up, if you just stay still without any thought about, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, how to be helpful. If you don't have any thoughts about any of that, then you'll start being less helpful. I mean, part of the ways that you're helpful is because you're looking to be helpful. You want to be helpful. You're motivated to care and to be useful, to be part of the solution. That's your motivation. That's low entropy. But if you don't have that, if it's just like, okay, I'm not going to be positive or negative, I'm just going to be. Here I am. I'm at this state of entropy. Now I'm just going to be. I'm not going to put any effort into it. Well, already you're not being as much a part of the solution as you were before, because you're just not trying anymore. You kind of have given up you're not putting energy into it. So I guess that's the way the best way to say it. If you're not putting any of your intentional focus into being part of the solution, then you become maybe neutral. You're maybe not part of the problem either. You're just not part of the solution. Well, you might even say that people who are neutral aren't all that helpful. They could be doing more. So in that sense, you do. If you stop working and you stop caring, and you just say, I'm done with it, then immediately you start your entropy level starts to go up. You become less able to do work, less able to change things, less able to make a difference. So then your entropy goes. So it seems like it's kind of a universal principle that applies everywhere. In order to keep growing, keep evolving, you have to put in effort. You don't evolve without effort. And if you don't evolve, then you begin to de-evolve. Evolution takes effort. I guess it takes caring. Caring's a positive thing. It requires energy to do something. You just can't sit and let everything go by. So, yeah, I think it is just a kind of a general idea that there is no end. One is going to be, put it in a negative way, on this treadmill, for forever. It's just a part of being. That's the price you pay for being, for existing. If you're going to exist, then it's going to take a little effort to continue to exist. So that's the price paid for being consciousness. Anything that pulls together a low entropy thing, then that can do stuff, can change things, can be something, then you have to continue to work at it, or it starts to dissipate.
Okay, thanks a lot for the answer. It's very helpful.
All right, Boris, please go ahead.
Hey, Tom. So my question is about divine grace. I'm going to read it because otherwise I'm going to get lost. So my question is about following consecutive spiritual awakening over the last years. I've been working relentlessly, sorry for pronunciation, to wake up from the dream through research, meditation, and healing. This endless chase has been leading me to so much peaks and valleys, and to the understanding that the actual awakening is not up to me as an AOC. So I'm feeling more and more that the actual effort we put into spiritual practices is simply here to prepare the field, and that the actual awakening happens by divine grace and many factors that are outside of our human consciousness. So my question is, if you could share a little bit more, a little bit about your experience on the topic.
I wonder a little what you mean by divine grace. Can you define that? Yeah, can you define that a little more precisely?
That's the thing, I don't really know. I've read about that in many traditions. Basically, my idea here is, I've been working my ass off to awaken, but I'm finding out more and more that it's not up to me. It's up to the RCS.
Well, I would probably disagree with that, Boris. I think it is mainly up to you, not up to the LCS. No doubt, as you evolve, like you say, you find peaks, you find valleys. It looks like you progress for a while, and then it seems to not go anywhere, and you may be a little frustrated with that because you have a sense that you'd like to get there and be that and get to the, as high as you can get as soon as you can get there. But growing up is not that easy. It's not that simple, and it's not a direct path. It's got hills and valleys, but those valleys are part of the learning situation. You see, we're not working to escape. It's not an escape. We're not working to get beyond this and get out of it and escape it. We're working to become, not to escape. And those valleys that you get into that seem like, oh, I thought I was really doing good, but now here I am again, just kind of same place I was before. Those valleys are places where you get to, you get to practice. That's your application. That's where what you've learned gets applied to reality, however you find it. You apply it there. And that application is important. It can't just be all, learning, all, so it can't be all in your mind in the sense that it's not experience. It has to be experience too. You have to go out and interact with things. You have to take what you've learned and apply it to people, apply it to being useful, apply it to making connections, apply it to relationships. That's how you become part of the solution. If you just grow up and you kind of go from being here to floating above it all to disappearing into the great beyond, then that's escaping. That's going away. So I think you keep getting grounded. You keep being thrown back into the pool, saying, "All right, swim," and you say, "Oh, I thought I climbed out of this pool." And it's well, you've learned some things, but now go back and be useful. Teach that person next to you how to swim. Do something that's valuable here. Cooperate, care, right, about other. So if it was just a matter of our own kind of ascension into the mysticism and into the being one with all and that sort of thing, then the best way to get there would be to like some of the old yogis did, go find a cave, and go live in it and spend 12 hours a day in meditation and you would get there more quickly. But that's really not what it's about. What it's about is caring, cooperating, being part of something bigger. That's what it's about. Not disappearing into the great beyond and coming one with the Godhead. It's about being useful here, interacting, helping. So it does pull you back into this level. And the valleys are always there for you to reconnect, but you reconnect at a higher entropy level. You understand more things. You're able to be more helpful. You're able to do more. You're not at the same place you were. And then you evolve a little more and you come and you can help at a little higher level. You see, in the beginning, we tend to work just on ourselves. It's just about us, right? We're going to work on ourselves. We're going to get rid of that fear, get rid of that ego, get rid of those beliefs. And we spend our time focused on that. And that's a good thing. That's not being too self-centered. That's a good thing. You should work on getting rid of your fear and your ego and your beliefs. But eventually, as you become more and more successful at getting rid of that fear, ego, and belief, your attitude changes from one of student to one of teacher. So you evolve yourself to the point that you can be more useful to other people. And you keep evolving yourself. But as you become more useful to other people, you need to be more useful to other people. And you can only do that by getting involved with other people and connecting with them and interacting with them at the level that they happen to be at, which helps pull them up. You can't say, well, here I am and I have the answers and you need to grow up to be where I am and then I'll be able to talk to you. That's not so helpful. You need to go where they are and interact with them in a way that you give them good example, you help them understand, you give them just the next little baby step that they need to take in order to see a bigger picture. And then you wait patiently for them to maybe take that baby step. And after that, and they get used to that baby step, which to them is a giant step, then you can help them take the next little baby step. You see, so you change from being the seeker who wants to get rid of fear, ego, and beliefs to a teacher who wants to help other people get rid of fear, ego, and beliefs, wants to build something better. Think of us, a century from now or 2 centuries from now, however it is, and we have, 4 or 5 billion people, all who understand that they're here to become love, all caring, all wanting to help and build and create something together. What could they create? What could billions of people together create? Think of the collective consciousness that you would have and the power that collective consciousness would have. That would be a great force for good. Or think of, 1 billion people and each one of them sitting in their own cave. So you got 1 billion people sitting in 1 billion caves and they're all trying to improve themselves. Well, you kind of run out of steam there after a while. All right, so you're the improved model now. Now get out there and do something with it, make something of it. That's the idea. Yes, 1 billion people each sitting in their own cave doesn't really make anything that's much bigger for all of us. It's not the point. So, that's what I would say about that. Yes, you go inward, you grow, you get rid of fear, you become love, you're empathetic, you have all of these things. And now you're kind of back in the world again. And it seems like the only way you're going to get there is with this divine grace, where the larger conscious system comes in and taps you and takes you away into the ether. And now you become, I don't know what you become, an angel or special friend of the LCS, get 5 gold stars next to your name. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But in any case, that's really not the point of it all. Now, a lot of Eastern philosophies, that is the point of it. And in the non-dualist philosophy, that is the point of it. You come here and suffer until you don't have to suffer anymore, and then you go back home, and that's kind of the idea, that it is about escaping, growing up and escaping. But I don't really see, the value in that. I don't see that is a philosophy that works real well. It doesn't seem to go anywhere. It just seems to be it's a cycle that really doesn't have a whole lot of purpose. It just does it because that's what it does. But there's not a lot of purpose in it. All right, let me break off a piece of myself and let it suffer until it stops suffering, and then it'll come back. And then I'll break off it, maybe I'll break it off again and let it suffer some more until it comes back. But there doesn't seem to really be it's not going anywhere. It's just this cycle that goes around and around and around, but doesn't have a whole lot of purpose to it. And in my mind, things need purpose. Things don't just happen for no purpose. Things don't exist for no purpose. They have to be developing. They have to be going someplace. They have to be growing. They have to be giving back. They have to be building something, not just a cycle of individual pieces suffering and then becoming better and then more suffering. It just, again, you end up where you started. So I see this as an evolutionary process. And part of that is that you have to engage with the rest of the world. Now, after you come out of your cave and you have very little ego and very little, fear and so on, and you've been a seeker for a long time, and now you're up at this rarefied level. All right. Oh, going back going back into the cesspool or whatever you want to call it, where all this ordinary people are, well, that's like, who wants to do that? Ooh, I don't want to, rub up against all that nasty, smelly, sticky stuff. I graduated. I got out of that. But then that becomes your ego. You see yourself as better. You see yourself as the new improved model, and you don't want to get reintegrated with all the junk and negativity and stuff that's here. Well, the point is, you don't have to. You don't have to become it. What you do is you're here to help it grow. You become part of the solution here. It's not that you join it. You should come back here and start suffering again by making a lot of poor choices. You understand, bring that understanding back and apply it in some way. Find ways to be part of the solution, to be part of the thing that a century from now, we have billions of people who are caring, loving, all about other. Wow, now that would be great to have a society like that. Wow, what we could do with that. Just think of the potential we have. How much potential in each individual is lost. What is the human potential? What could it become? And how much it is lost in destruction and negativity and that sort of thing. Well, that's what we're working toward, and there's really no end to that. What could we do? What could we be? What if all 7.5 billion of us were caring and loving and had big pictures? What could we do with that? Well, I think we could do some things that are so marvelous we can't even think of them now. That would be a wonderful place. And maybe we would then go to other virtual realities, other places, to try to help them grow up. I don't know. That's so far out ahead of my experience that it's hard for me to say anything too rational about it. But I just see the potential, though I can't necessarily define it because it's not my experience yet. So that's how I would talk to you about the waiting for divine grace to come pluck you up and send you someplace is not what it's about. And divine grace is not going to do that. And it's going to make you feel frustrated because why not? Look, I paid my dues. I've been in the cave. I've gotten rid of my fear. Why don't you come get me? I'm ready, divine grace. What's the problem? And then you end up with frustration. And then that frustration starts to lead to, oh man, I don't know if any of this stuff made any sense. Maybe I've just, been, pushing on a string and nothing really happens here. I may have missed the whole boat. What if I've deluded myself all this time? And then you start getting negative, and then you see the whole thing, the whole thing falls apart, starts to come unglued. So I think that's probably not a good space to go to, is waiting for divine grace to come in and deliver you to, the cloud of your choice, and, the harp of your choice, and let's let you be there. So that would be my sense of what it's all about, and why you feel kind of stuck, that you're just not progressing. Because I think your sense of progression is not one of service so much as it's personal progression. You're going to progress upward personally until you escape. But that is dominant Eastern philosophy, but I just don't see it that way. It doesn't seem to provide the logic or the potential or have the purpose that the MBT model has. So I don't know. I guess that's all I have to say about it, Boris.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Thanks.
that's helpful.
Yeah, I got busted about escapism. Anyway, so I had another question about presence, which I've been supposed to ask for months now. Basically, I've been led by the LCS to integrate its presence deeper outside of meditation or even relationships. Mm-hmm. So I would be curious if you would have any tips to anchor deeper the LCS presence into every moment outside of meditation, or outside of meditation.
Of course, the way to actually do that as well as it can be done is just to become love. If your motivations are caring, and your motivations are about how can I help and how can I serve, and how can I be part of the solution, then you just naturally would do all the right things. You will be present. That presence of love, that presence of caring, that presence of fearlessness is something you'll bring to everything you do. You will do it, and you'll kind of understand why and how it connects to the whole, and you feel positive about it. Even you get up in the morning and you make your bed, and it's nice and tidy. It looks good when you're done, and you wonder, why did I do that? I'm just going to pull it apart tonight. But you realize that that's low entropy. You've made that bed, everything in its place. It looks good. It looks neat. Your environment is now more aesthetic. It's more pleasing, but not only to you, to everybody. So, just little things like that, how you treat other people, how you connect, it creates an environment that is healthier, where people are more able to grow in that environment. You walk into a place of work or somebody's house or your own house or whatever, you walk into a place and just everything's strewn all over the place. That is very high entropy, but it's not helpful to your growth. It's not helpful to your thinking. It's not helpful to your being in that kind of an environment. So just trivial things like your environment, like making your bed, tying your shoestrings in the morning, even though you're going to untie them again that night, doing all the little things that seem meaningless in your life and doing them well, doing them for a reason. You make the world a little neater place. When your bed's made, the world's just a little neater place than it was otherwise. And that makes you part of the solution. You see, less of the chaos. And okay, that's a small thing. Boris's bed's made. How does that affect the whole world? Well, not much, but it is a part of that whole world, and it's a little less chaos. So you just see yourself as a kind of a source of low entropy, and you share that wherever you can. You're the person that if you see, if people are arguing, And maybe they're both friends of yours. You're the one that can kind of tone that down. Say things to each one that lets them settle down and get over their big ego problem and maybe see things better, because you don't get that way, because you don't have that fear that makes you upset and get angry. So you're the water that puts out the fire, and just wherever you go in life, the people you associate with, the relationships you have, you just leave light wherever you go, because you are light. That's how you become part of the solution. When you become light, when you become love, then you just leave little nice things, little made beds all over the place, wherever you go, in your relationships, the people you see, in your job, whatever it is you do. It follows you around. You spread it just by example, and that helps. It helps tremendously. And then as you get more experience under your belt and you think you've come to a place of solidity and so on, then you'll do things like you'll write books, you'll make videos, you'll do things that will help other people on a larger scale. But meanwhile, your life, your day-to-day life, just needs to be led naturally, just because you care about people and things. And then when you find yourself getting upset or annoyed or whatever, then you say, I guess I still have some work to do. And you work on those things. So you're always working on yourself. But at the same time, you're spreading low entropy wherever you go. If we just had a few million people doing that, it would change the whole nature of our planet. So, we do our part. The other 100 million people have to do their part whenever they grow up to it, but we just do our part. And it is what it is.
Thank you, Tom.
Arthur, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. How to deal with the fear of abandonment? Is it a root fear, or are there deeper fears behind? A person abandoned in a past life could carry this fear forward, as an example.
Yeah, the fear of abandonment is made of other fears. That's just, abandonment is a particular experience to wrap fear around. But the abandonment, everyone who has a feeling of abandonment isn't the same. They come in all kinds of different colors and shapes and sizes. And that's because the component fears making them up are all different. A big part of abandonment can be a feeling of not being good enough, a feeling of not being worthy. Of course, that's why you were abandoned, right? Well, you must not have been worthy. That's why you were abandoned. Well, that's not rational. That's an irrational thought. Of course, it wasn't because, you weren't worthy. It was because of whoever it was abandoned. That was their thing, not your thing. But we don't act like that, particularly, or we don't think like that, feel like that, particularly when we're children. We start taking on senses of being inadequate. We take fears of being left, fears of not being good enough, but people don't really care about us, that we're not cared for. Okay, I got a lot of friends, but I don't have any really good friends. I don't have anybody who would really stick by me, thick and thin, hot and cold. They'd be here. I just have a lot of acquaintances. Well, we tend to see that. But when you feel that way, then you find that everywhere. In other words, if you have these fears of not being good enough, not being lovable, not being desired, not being wanted, I think it does come down mostly to just not being good enough, not being adequate, not being what you need, what you think you need to be. And that is a very core fear. Matter of fact, a very large number of the population has that fear of not being good enough, feeling inadequate, insecure. And for 100 different reasons, not all for the same reason, for 100, probably 1,000 different reasons, people have that. Abandonment's just one of those reasons. If they were abandoned sometime, then they have this sense of failure, of not being adequate. So I think that's the core fear underneath the abandonment fear. And anything that is negative about yourself is dysfunctional. Any feeling you have, any idea you have that is negative, being negative about yourself, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm not competent, I'm not lovable. People can easily walk away from me because I'm just not all that much. And I fear that they will. So I'm afraid to invest in that relationship because I know in a deep, secret, fearful place that they're likely to walk away from me. Therefore, I don't have deep relationships. And then they look at the fact that they don't have deep relationships and people walk away from them, and that just verifies it. Well, part of the reason that's the case is because you believe it. And when you believe it, you create it. When you have those negative beliefs, you create that negative situation. And that's the problem. So you live your life and you see it everywhere. Look, I had this relationship and that relationship, and everywhere in your life are examples of people walking away and not sticking with you. Now, some of that may be true because that's what you are creating. But a lot of that is just your interpretation. Remember, your reality isn't necessarily what happens. Your reality is how you interpret what happens. And somebody who feels abandoned would be very likely to interpret all sorts of things as abandonment, even when they're not, because that would be how you'd interpret it. So you've got two things against you there. One, your interpretation is going to follow that fear. And two, you're going to behave in ways to create that, make that fear come true, to materialize that fear. So that's all the bad news. What is the good news? The good news is that you can you need to get rid of that fear. And you get rid of that fear, I've explained many places. You can look that up. We have a new sort through all the thousands of hours of my YouTube by subject. We have that tool now, so you can go to my site and get it. And there's a link, and you can go in there and put, how to deal with fear, and you'll get a whole bunch of stuff will come up about that. But basically, first, you just have to recognize it is a fear, and two, you have to look and see how that fear has changed your life, how that fear has driven your choices. And when you do, that should give you enough incentive to get rid of it. And you have to be aware of it. What does that fear sound like? What kind of choices do I make? How does it affect me? And then be aware of that. And when you feel yourself being affected by it, just stop. Say, no, I don't want to be that way. And have a strong intention. Don't want to be that way. And eventually you won't be that way, because you're having this strong intention. Will modify that probability, and you'll stop being that way. But it's not something you can just do for a week or something you can think about, once a week. This is something that has to be in the back of your mind all the time. I feel that feeling of being insecure in this relationship, or afraid to really develop and invest in that relationship because it might turn out to be bad. When you get these things, you get stop. I don't want to be that way. If it looks like this is a relationship that has potential, I'm going to invest in it. And if it goes bad, I'll deal with that positively, and I'll invest in the next one. You see, positive attitude. You're not going to be like that. So that's how you deal with it. But this feeling of inadequacy is, when we talk about pandemic, it's everywhere. Lots and lots of people have this feeling of being inadequate. It's very, very common. So you're not in a boat alone. You're in a boat with a whole lot of other people. So when you have two people and they meet each other and they both have feelings of inadequacy, you see there's a problem there. Both of them are a little afraid to invest because they feel inadequate and it's probably not going to work out. So I don't want to invest and get in it and then suddenly have it go away because, it'll blow up. So you have two people that are afraid to really give Well, a relationship where everybody's afraid to give doesn't work out very well. And then they go, I knew it. See, it just fell apart. It always does. So you create it, you make it come true. So realize that it's not only you, but everybody else is in that boat too. So you have to have some understanding that other people are also shy. And you have to cut them slack and cut yourself slack and discuss it. And don't hide it. Be honest and upfront with people. How you feel, why you feel that way. People of quality will be willing to work with that. People of low quality won't. Well, when it comes to people of low quality, good riddance. The people of quality that you'd really like to have relationships, well, we'll be okay working with that as long as it's upfront and honest. What they can't work with is the hidden stuff that comes up and just bites them in the dark. That's problematic. But if you're upfront and forward and honest and whatever, good people can work with that.
Okay, thanks. And there's another question about dreams. So if the source of a dream is myself, is it the free will awareness unit or the IUOC? Does the IUOC send the data stream to the dreaming free will awareness unit?
No, the dreaming is not always of yourself. That dreaming can be given to you from elsewhere. And it's mostly data stream that you're getting from the larger consciousness system. And mostly it's data that you need, information, things you need to learn, but not always. Sometimes your dreams are just generated by yourself. So it's not like dreams only come from one source. You can just generate them by yourself. You can, it can be you working out your own problems. It can be you trying to deal with things that you're going to have to deal with in the near future. It could be you experiencing your fears, in the dream world. It could be all sorts of things, but mostly the dreams that are more meaningful are dreams that just come from the LCS. Think of it as another virtual reality game. All of your experiences are just different virtual reality games. So if you look at it that way, then yeah, it can be just you. Sometimes you get so involved in something that you dream about it. That's not from the LCS. That's just you because you're preoccupied with it. You're consumed by it. I remember once looking, 150 envelopes and putting stamps on them and something, and I did that. And all night long that night, I'm licking envelopes and stamping things because I thought it would never end, one of those things. So that's not the LCS, having fun with me, giving me envelopes to lick in the non-physical. That's just me having trouble letting go of something that was almost obsessive, getting done with the big pile that needs to be sent out. So hopefully that will help. Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.